But yeah, as Rhea mentioned, I am a research director at Youth for Energy Southeast Asia, Y4EC for short, or just Y4E. We got to work on the naming, to be honest, because it gets quite complicated and it's bad for branding as well, I'll be honest. Um,
Wow.
but yeah, so I've been at Y4E for about 3 years now. I joined the organization back in late 2023, I think, early 2024. Bit about, I guess, the organization, Youth for Energy Southeast Asia. We are a regional youth collective comprised of members from all across Southeast Asian member countries, 11 now, with East Timor included, and not just 10. And basically, we're this ragtag group of volunteers, I mind you, of young people that are passionate about energy. They work in energy or are currently studying energy. Or there's another subset, people who's looking into pivoting into the energy. And so the vision that we have with this organization when our co-founders established it back in 2022. Our co-founders are Jitsai Santaputra and Amira Bilkis, one from Indonesia, one from Thailand, is that we want to have a regional network of young professionals and students across the region to advance the energy transition together. And why together? Because Southeast Asia, and this is going to sound cliche, but stronger together. Because unlike the sum is greater than all the parts in a sense, especially when it comes to advancing the clean energy transition. A couple of our activities are reflected in our mission is reflected in the activities that we do. We try our best to ensure that we are increasing the representation of Southeast Asian youth in the energy transition dialogue and discussions, both regionally and also internationally and globally. We have activities in the form of workshops, capacity buildings, all in the objective to empower youth to be able to build careers in this energy related fields, as well as partnering up with like-minded organizations. And so, again, we're a voluntary youth collective. We are not paid. I don't work Y4E full time. That's the Y4E does not put food on the table for me. It's the Ember role as well as the lecturer role for me. And then just another thing that I'd like to add, and I think this is what I believe makes Y4E special, is that we have a pledge. So if a lot of you here are familiar with the nationally determined contributions, which is basically the country's pledge to the Paris Agreement on reducing X amount of emissions against the baseline by 2030, 2035, 2050, whatever, net zero. Y4E also has our own pledge, and we committed this at COP28 in the UAE, and has been registered at the UN, and includes key commitments with definitely a smart objective, right? It's something that's measurable, something that is realistic in our view, and something that we're committed to meeting by 2030, which is just 4 years away. So you can read a bit more about this UN Energy Compact, obviously on the UN website or our website. And yeah, I mean, we're looking for as much collaborations as we could, and hopefully we can share a bit about that in this session today. Because just like the NDCs, just like the energy transition, no country can go at it alone. Again, using that cliche phrase, we're better together. So yeah, back to you, Araya. That's just a bit of a plug about Y4E, where I come from, and a little bit about me.
Thank you. That was a very comprehensive, explanations and introductions on your organizations and also you yourself. So what I get is here, you're holding many roles, right? You teach youth, you are communicating with youth, you engage with youth directly, and also you are still counts as youth, right? You hold so many roles in our topics today, and um, I'm just wondering that. perhaps before we talk a bit deeper about the youth engagement itself, can you put on your lecture hat just a bit now and then explain in definition way what is youth engagement and why is it important to talk about it now?
Yeah. So that's a good segue to this report that we did with the United Nations ESCAP along with BRICS YEA, which is the BRICS Youth Energy Association or agency. I forgot. Again, so many acronyms across this field in general. Sorry, did I lose you there? It's like you're frozen on my end. Is my internet doing well? Hello,
I think
everyone?
it's my internet that is making a bit of problem, but I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Just making sure that I'm not talking to just four walls around me. Yeah. So, first of all, I think we need to get real first with everyone in the room here. When we talk about youth engagement, youth participation, youth involvement, there are like so many layers and so many different definitions to that, and it gets caught up in sometimes a reductionist or maybe on another extreme, a more too frontal of an approach to youth engagement, youth involvement, youth discussion, participation, whatever. The way that we framed real youth engagement within this report that we worked on with UN ESCAP and BRICS YEA, and has been a framework that Y4EC has used since our founding, is what we call a ladder of participation. So this is a qualitative framework or a theoretical framework of the levels of engagement that youth can get when it comes to being able to decide on something. And this something could be climate issues, energy transition, what have you. As you can see here, there are 8 levels, all the way from level 1 to level 8, where level 2 and level 1, we just drop that. That is when youth is involved in events simply as a decoration, simply as a just for the sake of it, right? Manipulation is, I think that's self-explanatory. It is when young people are taken into account, but not necessarily to be asked and to be listened to, but just to be influenced and manipulated in the ways that this supra institution that is trying to get buy-in from the youth is trying to do. But what's a gray area that is happening in a lot of countries, and particularly in Southeast Asia, that we found in this particular report and that we've mapped out, is tokenism or youth washing. And this is not real youth engagement, because these are when youth gets invited into dialogues, gets delegated certain tasks or assignments, but they are not necessarily the one that decides on them. They're not necessarily the ones that are given the authority to basically put pen on paper to decide what's going to happen with what have you, maybe deciding on shutting down a coal power plant right now, here and then, or deciding on maybe writing down an investment plan for increasing electrification or transforming the grids. Speaking strictly on energy here. Same thing could be applied with climate as well, right? So this is a gray area that sometimes that in a lot of countries people are confused by. People are not realizing that they are being placed in a tokenist position, that they are taking part in youth washing itself, because it takes two to tango. On the youth front as well, getting involved in these things sort of creates this spiral of ensuring and enabling further tokenism and youth washing, right? We're not just trying to point fingers and blame certain stakeholders or certain groups or demographies. It's a collective issue. right? What's real is when we have an ability to share the decisions, to put pen on paper and ensure that the energy transition starts today. The energy transition needs to end by X year. The amount of emissions that needs to decrease in this country needs to happen by X month, X year, and so on and so forth. And even then, there are 3 levels to that. There are things that can get adult initiated, but still the decision is shared by the youth. The youth can initiate it or direct it, or the highest level, the real youth engagement that we need to push for and strive for, right, is a youth-initiated discussion or issue, and the decisions to tackle that is shared with the adult. All right? So final point on this is what we define as real engagement, real youth engagement, sorry, right? Anything but this, we will not classify that as real youth engagement. They're simply youth getting a fancy invitation to a workshop with the director general of what have you. Youth gets involved in a fun run or a marathon with a political party, right? That's not youth engagement. So first of all, this is the framework that we've used, and it's based on a solid foundation of an actual theory, Roger Hart's ladder of participation. But interestingly, the one that we framed here, Roger Hart's ladder of participation, in its own is not a foundational theory. The foundational theory goes way back. It's called Sherry Arnstein's ladder of participation. I think began in, she wrote that in 1960s or 1970s, right? So the point is, though, this sort of framework is what we've used as reference, and the principles to define what youth engagement is and what it isn't. Back to you, Rhea.
Thank you, Ardhi. It is definitely very interesting to see the theory ground behind youth participations, because with the way people are talking about youth as if it is something that is new. Meanwhile, we already got the theory way back then, even since 60s and 90s, right? But I'm curious if you have any some sort of data that you can share to put it in this specifically ASEAN region, because we're talking about ASEAN's energy transitions, right? Like where is the region positioned in terms of youth engagement right now?
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to follow up to that with another part of the deck. By the way, everyone, whatever I'm presenting right now is based on this, which is a report, as I mentioned earlier, that we co-wrote with UNESCAP. The coverage of this report is Asia Pacific. It's a descriptive mixed method kind of report where we talked with and surveyed youth all across Asia Pacific, as well as youth organizations or youth institutions or movements, etc., what have you, those that focus on climate and those that don't. And that's why, and that's important because you will see in Southeast Asia in particular, we've mapped out that, again, this is based on the perspective and how it is perceived and the reception from the youth side, that actual youth engagement is not here yet in most of Southeast Asia, especially so for energy sector engagement. I'm not going to go through the details of each line of each examples, but you can see here from the data points that in a lot of Southeast Asia, we're still in the yellow zone. Youth, organizations, institutions, movements, or even individuals that may or may not have some leverage or influence in their own communities are simply invited to the dialogues on energy as a youth laundry, to youth wash. Not necessarily those that have meaningful participation. But this is just for the energy sector. Thankfully, though, in some countries like Indonesia, Vietnam, Malaysia, on general participation of the youth, meaning in some aspects, in some sectors of climate or any other youth-related focus agendas, there's a decent amount of meaningful participation enabled systemically. But on energy, not so yet. Not yet, right? So imagine, I want to contextualize this for everyone against the, and sorry, juxtapose this against the women's suffrage movement. This does not happen out of thin air, right? We have all these amazing women within ASEAN Centre for Energy, moderating the session, working in energy, focusing on energy. We look back 50, 60 years ago, this was a man's world, right? It did not happen out of nowhere. It came up about because there was the struggle, the suffrage. There was the continued push to showcase that women deserve as much opportunity as men. Women has enough and as much capability and also the potential and could drive innovation, could drive resilience, could bring about profits in private sector companies, could drive efficiency. There's a lot of research around this. I'm not just, pulling this out of nowhere. A lot of like solid econometrics-based research that have showcased this. Similarly, there have been research on that for the youth as well. Youth creates growth, value, and innovation, right? An AARP survey showed that 83% of global executives already agree that multi-generational workforces are necessary for growth and success of an institution. And then in the Netherlands, PwC did a research, and one of their findings is that companies with an age diversity in board membership, meaning the board membership is not just full of elderlies or older people, but it's a mix and match with young people, mid 30s and older ones as well. They're the ones that create a lot of value, and they can create as much as 51.8 billion euros of additional value if they had those diversity. And then another research, this was more of a econ research against German firms. Those that have 25%, this is like the Goldilocks zone or the threshold, 25% share of young employees would lead to these firms to adopt more new technologies compared to those other firms where the share is much lower, right? So the proof is already here. And these are the kinds of similar research that we also have pushing for diversity of gender in institutions. Unfortunately, though, for the use case, it's not yet part of the diversity, equity, and inclusion agenda. And according to PwC, this is a huge missed opportunity because institutions that do not include younger voices lack different perspective. They are held back from potential to create more value, to gain more adoption of new technologies, and so on, right? These are micro sector, micro scale foundations. But imagine this mapped out against a larger issue with like energy and the institutions that need to drive the energy change, transition, what have you, right? If these institutions are also not populated with a lot of young people, it kind of makes sense that we are still attached to the old technologies, the fossil fuels, the technologies of the old past time, right? Because right now it's shown that there's more resistance towards adoption of new technologies if there's lack of diversity in terms of age within those that have the power bestowed upon them to make decisions, to drive change, and so on. So yeah, that's how it was mapped out in Southeast Asia, and this is why youth diversity is important. Back to you, Rhea.
Thank you. Do you find it really fun to see the data and just to establish that we're not talking about youth engagement just because the topics are in, but because there's a data backing this, that this is something that is very important, and especially when we're talking about energy transition, in which would require a lot of progressive technology and also policies and etc. So yeah, but back to your to the graph that you showed about ASEAN member states youth engagement. Am I right to conclude that we are still in the yellow zone of youth engagement, but we are moving towards the actual meaningful youth engagement? Like, do you see that we are moving towards that? And what kind of driving factors that makes youth in ASEAN specifically interested to join in this sector?
Yeah. All right. So first of all, the research scope was a single year survey, and also a descriptive study. As I said, we talked with the youth across Asia Pacific and so on. So I wouldn't say that we know we're moving there or not to levels of meaningful participation, but instead, judging by the fact that for non-energy related issue, the perspective of the youth in some of the ASEAN countries is that there is a potential for them, there is a platform for them to enter into the decision-making rooms and halls. There is an opportunity that we push energy to become one of those issues as well, right? I want to turn back to my analogy. Back in the day, as the women's suffrage movement builds up, it didn't suddenly, the glass ceiling wasn't suddenly broken in all the rooms. Like, imagine if the different rooms are different sectors, different issues. A lot of women had to break the glass ceiling one by one, room to room, right? And again, I think energy in particular, for instance, 30, 40, 50 years ago, we wouldn't have this room with a lot of women with engineering degrees that have really domain knowledge on the issue and becoming experts in energy. Same thing happening here is our belief. There are these opportunities where we bring about energy into the mix of things that youth needs to have a place in, and making it statutory, making it something that is obligatory by law, just like how the inclusivity agenda now has pushed the point where there needs to be gender balance, right? Imagine down the line, the way we want to push this as well is imagine institutions from the lowest levels up until the highest levels of echelons need to have a mix of generation or need to have a mix of age, right? It's going to take time, but the point that I'm trying to make is this is not something new. This is not something fresh in the sense that there is no pathway for us to work or a framework as reference. We have it, again, in the women's suffrage movement. And this is the exact same thing. And the benefits, also the exact same thing, right? The innovation, the value, the resilience that it creates, and so on. Rhea?
Thank you so much. That was very insightful, and I guess it's just something for us to look forward to see how this effort of increasing youth involvement is integrated in a more systematic way. So I would like to remind our participants again that you can also ask questions to Ardhi here. Please feel free to put your questions on the Q&A box. Meanwhile, I will take the advantage to ask a little bit more about the report, because you also shared, you presented the report that you work with UNESCAP, right? I read the report, and I think one of the findings that is talked in the report that really picks up my interest is about there's a survey about the preference of youth involvement right now, and in which there is a graph that shows that currently youth prefer to be involved in a volunteering and also project involvement method, if you can say that. Meanwhile, the category of policy advocacy is quite low. I think it's at the end of each spectrum, and it's just interesting for me. Why why do you think this could happen? Is it because we are so young that we don't think that we can advocate, we have the capacity to advocate the policy?
Yeah, so that's a good point that you raised, Rhea. So let me just reframe this again for the rest of the audience. One of the results of the survey in this research that we did with UN SCAP is that a lot more youth feel that the roles that they can play in to advance SDG 7 and the energy transition, a majority are as volunteers or project implementers, as research academicians, as educators, community leaders, and so on. Those are the ones that we get 55% and above the youth agree on doing those kinds of roles. The lower ends are being policy advocates or being part of an industrial workforce. And it feels counterintuitive to see that we're doing this push for more youth in participation, like real participation in formal policy structures or formal energy institutional structures, but then it seems like there's not a lot of buy-in. Our further assessment of this result, based on follow-up discussions, is that this result actually reflects the fact that the barrier of entry is so high that the youth feel like they're not going to be able to do much in this space anyway. Again, back to that glass ceiling argument, the ceiling is way too high to even break. So they're going to find another room, another avenue that they know is more reachable for them. So this is a systemic issue, less than of a youth not having enough of the motivation to bring about change within the specific subsector of the energy debate, discussion, what have you. And yeah, so for this instance, asking or requesting for more formal spaces where the youth can enter into these institutional structures is what we can do best as young people. Because I want to also quickly answer this first question, if I may, about the breakthrough from token participation to genuine agenda setting, power, measurable influence, blah, 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 blah. So this is interesting because I forgot, maybe it was 6 years ago, 5 years ago, I wrote a book with the Friedrich something Stiftung, forgot what the name of the institution is, but basically I wrote a book with them talking about tracking the history of the climate/energy/environmental movement. Again, this also did not happen out of thin air. A brief history for everyone. The Ministry of Environment, like in Indonesia, KLHK, or Ministry of Environments in other countries, they did not come out of nowhere ever. When Indonesia got independent, we did not immediately have an Ministry of Environment or KLHK or what have you. These ideas about caring for the environment, caring for the energy transition, climate, and issues and whatnot, they're built up through years and years of progress on the streets, but also behind closed doors. And in that book, again, it's not a plug on the book. The book is free to download anywhere you want. I'm not asking people to buy it. But I'm tying it back to that because when writing that, it kind of radicalized me to believe that it may seem small what we're trying to do now, even having these kinds of conversations online with a few tens of people across Southeast Asia. But we're a believer that you can't make a splash, but you can be like small drops of water that are plentiful, that slowly ripples the calm waters and suddenly brings about the change. Same with the Ministry of Environments. I think I'm not exactly sure the actual tale behind this, but if I'm not mistaken, it was Emil Salim. Emil Salim is one of Indonesia's ministers during the New Order era. I think the tale of how he initiated the Ministry of Environment in Indonesia for the first time was because he met Indira Gandhi at the time in 1972 during the United Nations Human Conference on the Environment. The argument that Indira Gandhi told Emil Salim at the time was basically, hey, look, we need to care about the environment and we need to be agreeing on this together as developing countries because we're the ones that are going to get impacted the most and we don't have the resources to secure it, right? So Emil Salim supposedly got inspired by that, went back to Indonesia, told the president, we need to set up a Ministry of Environment office, and that happened. Suddenly, the agenda of environment came about in Indonesia. And I promise you, this is like also the sort of similar trajectory or pathways or tails that you would find in other countries, just because the point that I'm trying to make is things don't come out of thin air, right? Things don't appear just like that. So on the point about bringing about change, moving and breaking through young people from tokenism to real participation, engaging in these conversations is definitely one thing, right? First, we know. The second thing, again, proof. The proof is there, but making sure that the proof gets listened and heard of, right? And what proof am I talking about? The data that I presented earlier, showing that, look, if more young people are allowed into the higher echelons of decision making, there's going to be less resistance to adopting new technologies. There's going to be more potential for innovation. There's potential for more patents to be adopted and so on and so forth. I think one also important distinction is that for better or for worse, or well, in this case, for better, is that younger people are more risk averse, right? So they
are more daring. Yeah.
Yeah, daring. That's the word. Yeah, that's the term, right? So that also is an important facet of why that adoption to newer technologies are more receptive and so on. So yeah, that I'm tying that with that question. Back to you, Rhea.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. And also for answering one of the questions. I'm also looking at the other question submissions here, and I think this one particularly related to our previous conversation. So this one is anonymous questions. The person asks, what practical steps can both adults and young people take to move beyond tokenism? Specifically, and this is the part where I think is very related to the previous statement that you made. How can institutions build greater trust in youth capabilities? I think this is also something that is briefly or maybe deeply talked in the report. The report talk about diminish youth credibility. It is a term that the section on the report is talk about, right? And I assume this is some big challenges that as youth who wants to participate is still figuring out how to face. Can you elaborate on this?
Yeah. So that diminished youth credibility thing that was covered in the report, it's actually one of the most important aspects as well. That I should have highlighted that as well as part of my presentation. But the point is, we have a lot of a web of institutionalized structures against us that is going to be difficult for us to break apart, obviously. And okay, maybe I'm gonna take back my word there. Not necessarily break apart, but remold and reshape. Right? We're not here to rebel or create any instability and whatnot. But I want to emphasize again that this is not a completely new issue. This is not a completely fresh challenge, because again, we have a lot to learn from the women's suffrage movement, even in the racial suffrage movement. Yeah, I'm gonna go into a bit of more of a controversial area here. Speaking of, for instance, slavery. We did not have that much in Southeast Asia. Ray, are you okay? Can you hear me clearly, or is it my audio gone? Oh, hello.
A bit here.
Is it my audio?
Okay. Yes. Now we are back. But can you perhaps
Oh, wait.
start from
Wait, did I where did I lose you? Sorry.
I think it might be my connections, but can you
Oh,
maybe
okay.
summarize a bit just
Yeah, yeah,
from the start?
yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, okay, okay. No, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. So let me again, this is I'm gonna navigate into try my best to navigate around this really nicely and properly, because this can be perceived as controversial. But the point that I was trying to make is that the youth suffrage, let's just call it the youth suffrage movement that we have right now, is not something new. It's not it's not something completely new that we don't have past experiences to learn from. We had the women's suffrage movement to learn from, right? To showcase that it's clear that we can't just have adult old white males in the room, right? To make decisions, because they're not representative of the whole population. Same with slavery, right? The idea that all humans are created equal, all humans have bestowed them rights, that did not just come about. Maybe in Southeast Asia specifically, our challenge with slavery is very different. But I want to talk about how it was abolished in the West, in the US, in Europe, right? Again, it started out with small movements before the institutional shackles are completely reshaped and taken down. Okay? But it started with abilities and capabilities, meaning showcasing that both the women, those disenfranchised race or identities, have the same rights, have the same capabilities, have the same thoughts, have the same ideas, can speak the same language, or even better than those supposed overlords back in the day, which are the old white males, for instance, right? So same in this instance, right? We want to make sure that we are given the acknowledgement to be able to decide our own energy future. But then if we don't understand the energy issue much, right, or are able to basically take part in the lingo, in the jargonistic dialogue, then maybe that trust is not going to be given, right? So there's an anonymous attendee question I'm looking at now. What practical steps can both adults and young people? And it's tied into the previous one as well from Nathania Azelia. So I'm going to answer these two questions in this one phrasing, right? And this is what we're trying to do at Y4EC, right? We realize the young people have a lot of passion. They want to drive the energy transition in Southeast Asia. They want to reshape it to the best of their interest. And in this sense, ensuring that by the time I'm 50 or 60 years old, I can still breathe the air, right? Making sure that it's not too hot in 40 years' time. Whereas the people putting pen and paper right now, maybe they don't care too much because they know they only have like 5-10 years left of their lifetimes, right? But we're the one that has to clean up the mess, right? But at the same time, we won't be able to come into those rooms and be part of the discussions, civilized discussions, I mind you, if we're not showcasing that, look, we're actually at the same level as you are. We know as much as you are, as much as you do. We know that this is better than whatever you're trying to do, right? Again, similar to the women's suffrage movement, the abolishment of slavery, it is when the disenfranchised groups level up and step up to showcase that they are equals, or if not better than whoever is in charge right now, is the way to go. And that's why we're doing these. So in Y4EC, we're doing a lot of workshops. Recently, we started this mentorship program, second year running now, where we invite energy experts, professionals or climate professionals across the region, pair them up with ambitious youth, young people across the region, to basically open up the pathway to them and let them know this is what you can do in the energy space. So I hope that answers both these questions from anonymous attendee at 2:37 p.m. There's a lot of anonymous attendees. I have to plug them. And the other one is Nathania Azalia.
Yes, thank you so much for that questions, and you managed to answer two questions in one sessions. And I am definitely going to follow you up on your works in Y4EC. But before that, we also have another interesting questions here from Zulfikar. This might be OOT, out of topic. But any thoughts on how to balance with representation from the older generation in some industries or cases, which I assume also include energy sector? This could become an issue because the older generation might lose their competitiveness. So what do you have to say about this?
Yeah, first of all, it's not OT, it's definitely in topic because I think, and sorry, just for reference, the research that I've showcased before from PwC in the Netherlands, AARP surveys, as well as this 2008 study on German firms, at the end of the day, their conclusions include the fact that diversity of age or multi-generational responsibilities are what makes the resilience, the innovation, the growth, and what have you. Because ageism, which is like racism but for age, can go both ways. It can be underestimating the young people, right? But also just not taking a second look at the elderly, who definitely still deserve as much chance, right? But at the same time, we have to be realistic with the sign of times. Okay, this is also another research that we did at Y4E back in 2024 that I remember leading, where we mapped out the generational breakdown of executive cabinet members across Southeast Asia. This was 2024 data. So basically, like in Singapore, who's the Minister of Water, Minister of Transportation, President, Vice President, blah, 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 blah. And then Indonesia, who they are. And then we mapped out the age. And it shows that Southeast Asia, still a young populace. I mean, ASEAN Secretariat study, I think, says that Southeast Asia is going to peak in youth population by 2038, 220 million people or something. The point is, a majority of Southeast Asia is still a lot of young people or youth. But then the executive cabinet structures, highly represented by those from the boomer generations or the millennial generations, not necessarily the younger ones, right? So there's already a disconnect, right? There's already a clear unfairness, if you will, right now against the younger generation. Eventually down the line, yes, I agree. Once Southeast Asia gets to a point where we might be aging as a society, like in the Western civilizations right now, or even in highly industrialized economies like Taiwan, South Korea, or Japan, yes, the thought of older generations losing their competitiveness and being a concern is going to be important, right? Because in all fairness, thanks to the advent of better medical care, right, older people are surviving much longer. I mean, this is just a scientific fact, right, and a reality that we have to live with, right? And that means we are having people that are older that can stay much longer in their employment and in their workforce, right? But this is, again, then ties back to my point earlier about why then innovation is necessary. And those that drive innovation are multi-generational workforces, right? With innovation, you can create more rooms of opportunities, right? Imagine you're breaking all those glass ceiling, and from that, you can remold it into two separate rooms, one that can be occupied with a mix of different generations, right? Because right now, what we're doing is just replacement. And that replacement, now there's a backlog of it because, as I said, the reality of it is older people are surviving much longer because of the reality of advancements in medical care, and therefore they can stay longer in their jobs productively. And that's fair, that's fine, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. But it's unfair if the backlog it becomes a problem as well, right? Just for the sake of ensuring that those the elder generations can stay longer, we hold back the youth from entering the workforce, for instance, right? So there's definitely ways to navigate this better, but definitely, Mas Zulfikar, it's not an out-of-topic question. It's just that right now, the situation we believe, in our view, is different in Southeast Asia in contrast to other countries that are aging.
Okay, thank you so much. Still related to this topic, I think another anonymous questions is yes, at one side, we see that the older generation is, trying to keep the status quo and also the competitiveness, and perhaps on some point we can also acknowledge that in many cases they do have the experience that they can you can say implement better in the situations, but also at the same time there's also a challenge of there's this view that young people participate mainly to enhance their CVs. I assume this would be related to their participations and volunteering and also project implementations related to energy rather than their genuine motivations to create real impact. So the anonymous attendee asks, in your opinion, how can we cultivate authentic motivations and increase awareness so that youth engagement is meaningful and sustained?
Okay, I'll be frank and try to be diplomatic for this, but I don't feel like this is a huge issue. This is a non-issue against this whole wider. We'll always have bad actors, both in all levels of age, in all sorts of races, in all sorts of gender, in all sorts of level of experience, right? And of course, some would take advantage of this movement simply for their own personal gains, right? It's a non-issue, and the reason why it's a non-issue, particularly because once we continue building up that momentum, continue passing on the knowledge, passing it forward in terms of like what we're doing at Y4E, elevating the capacities of the youth in their energy knowledge and basically just general sense and imagination of how vast the climate/sustainability sphere is, it will become something that is just a given. Again, imagine now if there's a job opening somewhere, like maybe job opening at ASEAN Centre for Energy, as women, you would just apply anyway, right? You would there are no further fears that I think they're gonna be biased against me, I'm not gonna apply, right? But you talk to a lot of the women maybe 50, 60 years ago, that resistance, that self holding back is gonna be there, right? We're trying to remove that now. And how do we do that? Well, it's so aside just from institutional, meaning institutions as in like an actual tangible building with people inside, I'm talking about also institutional in the abstract sense, where it becomes something that is a norm that youth gets listened to without being dismissed, unlike dismissing the Q&A section. Actually, it's called dismiss there, right? Where adults in the room. Look, I'm imagining one day, Minister of Energy and Mineral Resources Bahlil comes up and talks to us all here right now, and then actually listens to us on whatever we want to say, and it's actually taken into consideration what we said, right? That's our North Star and where we should be headed towards. So yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. Yes, I think that's fair. It shouldn't be an issue whether you want to improve your CV or you have a genuine passion for climate and energy. I think it's all fair. We just want more youth to be involved as a start of bringing the point. So that is also another perspective that is important for us to hold. And luckily, there's no more questions left because we are a bit running out of time. Just in time for me to ask you one last question, Ardhi. So for this last questions, I'm going to ask you to imagine that you are granted one wish, which is to be able to implement any one recommendations for governments, companies, or NGOs, or whatever you think is the most important, which will be able to improve youth involvement in the energy transition sector. So what would it be?
All right, so I'm gonna spend the last 3 minutes here. Our call out for the energy space, which includes governments, the various aspects of the industry and the sector, is simply start measuring youth participation, involvement, and engagement. We've submitted to the IEA a complete youth metric breakdown. It's included in their Southeast Asia Just Energy Transition Indicators Handbook, where we map out what companies or institutions can start to do in terms of measuring in youth involvement, engagement, or participation. Because we're a believer that we don't know the scale of an issue or what to do about it unless we know the data behind it first. We need to first map out that, yes, in the grids sector or maybe in the EPC sector, there's a lack of youth in board memberships. So then we can start advocating for more youth in that sector in particular, subsector, right? But only when we start measuring it. And again, nothing new, nothing fresh. Companies are doing that, doing this already with ESG indicators, where measurements of gender diversity, racial diversity is already something that is part of the norm. What we want to do now is creating a new norm or including that as part of the ESG norm, wherein we measure generational breakdowns or age diversity.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Ardhi, for answering that questions. And that's a wrap for our sessions. I can safely say that let's hope that the youth metrics can be implemented and become part of our norm in, let's say, in a near and medium term, so that we can start to move to another more tangible action plan based on data. So yes, once again, thank you so much, Ardhi, for your insights with us, for making these conversations into something that is fun. And I believe that we can all agree that, well, you can start contributing to the energy sector, energy transition sector, despite how young you are. In fact, that is one of the value that you can have. Hopefully, these conversations can be another part to build the path towards that future. Thank you so much once again for Ardhi and also for our very engaging audience here. And I am going to give back the session to our MC.
All right. Thank you very much, Ms. Rhea and Mr. Ardhi, for the engaging discussion and valuable insights throughout the session. We definitely learned a lot. And to our audience, thank you as well for the very engaging questions that you guys have given. So, to wrap up today's discussion, we've covered quite a bit of ground. We walked through the ladder of youth participation from being merely a token voice to genuinely holding a seat at the decision making table. We also looked at where Southeast Asia currently stands, and much of the region, unfortunately, still sits at the tokenistic level. And finally, we addressed some thoughtful questions on how we can move things forward, how young people can transition from simply being invited into the room to actually shaping outcomes in the energy sector, both here in the Southeast Asia and beyond. So, definitely, it was a really insightful discussion, the whole thing that we had today. So, before we conclude today's session, I would like to invite both Ms. Rhea, Mr. Ardhi, and everyone in the room to have a brief photo session. So, please get ready and prepare your smiles for the camera. So, is everyone ready? Okay, I'm going to lead the countdown. First page, 3, 2, 1, smile. Okay, next one. 3, 2, 1, smile. Okay, last page, probably. 3, 2, 1. Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. And that concludes today's ARNECC Live podcast. Thank you for tuning into today's session. We hope that the discussion today provides new insights and valuable perspectives for all our participants. So stay connected with us through our social media channels, newsletter, and website to keep up with the latest updates on ARNECC and developments within ASEAN's energy and climate landscape. So my name is Nadia Geraldine Handeni. Thank you for joining us today. And we look forward to seeing you again next month for our next ARNECC webinars. So once again, thank you and have a nice day.
All right. Have a nice day, everyone. Bye. Thank you.